Hello and welcome to BloombergQuint. We're in conversation with Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India, trying to get the macro picture behind the budget. So thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us on BloombergQuint. I'll start with sort of the big picture here. I think the economic survey laid the road, talking about space for Capex. That's what the budget prioritized as well. I presume there were two important decisions to take at this point in time. One, whether to consolidate more or to keep spending going, and two, within the spending, whether to rebalance more towards Capex and sort of reduce the priority given to revenue expenditure. What drove those two decisions from a macroeconomic standpoint?
Well, you know the answer to that quite clearly. As far as the decision on in terms of Capex is concerned, we have clearly gone in that one direction, and not the first time. We expressed a preference for that as a route to revive the economy. Even last year, in the second half, you would have seen the massive ramp up of expenditure. So that is our consistent approach. Incidentally, this government, even in a longer run, has had a preference towards more infrastructure type spending over time. So it's not entirely new, but yes, now we are using that. So as far as the mix question that you are asking, I don't think you should be in any doubt about our view on the matter. Now, as far as how fast we want to consolidate, obviously there is a trade-off. On one hand, we do not want to, eternally have very high deficits, because there is a price you pay for it in terms of building up debt. At some point in time, you will have to repay it or service it and so on. So clearly, you don't want to run very large deficits. But on the other hand, you want to also provide some support. You don't want to wean the system suddenly off the fiscal support. So some trade-off was done, and was decided that, look, a 0.5% withdrawal of fiscal support is fair enough. The economy is strong enough to bear with it. And so we went with that, it is still a high level of fiscal deficit in terms of providing support. But on the other hand, it comes down somewhat, it signals a direction. And also, remember, we are enjoying somewhat elevated levels of GDP growth. Economy is still reviving and so on. So in that context, it's something we took the call was bearable.
There is a counter view on the second point, Sanjeev, that you could have chosen to consolidate more simply because there are large cash balances the government is sitting on. They could have perhaps reduced their borrowings a little bit more. Some of the revenue estimates have been questioned for being out of line with what seems realistic, lower. And that strain is all showing up in the bond markets. While I know that budgets are not prepared for bond markets, but it is sending out a message that this level of borrowings is going to put strain on the interest rate environment.
Look, if bond market analysts think that we are being very conservative on revenues, then they should see through it and factor in why are they betting the other way. I don't get this. I used to do that job.
Them a number. It's sitting on them like a heavy stone.
Hello, I used to do this job, and the point is, if somebody gave me a number that I didn't believe, I would bet the other way. So I don't even understand the argument that if you think our revenue estimates are too conservative, then consequently, why are you not betting the other way?
They're not seeing through that. They're looking at the 15 lakh borrowing, and they're looking at.
So I will leave you to judge. Maybe there's a trade in there.
There's a trade in there. Okay, not for me.
Well, you can't argue both ways. I'm afraid.
Okay,
you have to either argue that we have said the right thing and you're betting on that, or you have to argue that we are being too conservative, in which we have created a trade for you. You can't argue both ways on this. I'm sorry.
Okay, you take the number on face value, 15 lakh crore, right?
Yes.
And the market is saying that, look, this is a high number for many years, last year, this year, probably next year. We don't have the capacity to absorb this anymore. And
so we on the other hand think that this is absorbable. The yield prices, by the way, have moved up already. So this is already in the price. It is there in the price of yield. So it's now, let's see what happens from here on.
It's the prices, 300 basis points spread between, I don't need to tell you this, between the overnight rate and the 10-year is getting into crazy territory now, yeah.
So at some point in time, one of them is going to be wrong.
Okay. But you're not taking my sort of point here that, there is a supply issue, and hence that may have prompted a decision on.
So look, the point is, it's a simple matter. First of all, let us discuss whether 6.4 is a good level of consolidation. This is too little or too much. If you think that this is a reasonable consolidation without overdoing it, then you have the number of your deficit. Right? Now you extract out of that what you think is the small savings collections, and you get a residual. That is the number. It's not something too complicated to understand. So then you get a number. Now, if you think that this is the fiscal consolidation path is sensible, then by definition, the borrowing program is also sensible. And we made a judgment that this is something that the market can take, given that in the end, the RBI does have the capacity to manage it. We do have, so I think we should be able to do it.
The RBI has the capacity to manage in the sense that come in with bond purchases and the likes.
I think we have been through much more difficult times than this.
But
very recent times.
Again,
I'm quite certain that I don't think they're particularly. I mean,
to intervene. It may not be now.
What? Sorry.
The last few years, it was easier for the central bank to intervene. They could justify large-scale government bond purchases. Now they may not be.
No, I don't think that this is too difficult amount, because remember, this is also based on a situation where the economy is recovering very strongly. So you have to take all of those into account.
Okay, so net, you're saying that the balance in terms of risk reward lay on the spending side rather than consolidating quicker.
Yeah.
Okay, let me move on. So within the spending, the subsidy numbers look a little bit weaker than or lower than people would have expected. On food in particular, is there still thinking going on whether to extend the expanded food transfers, the free food transfers?
Well, presumably as we come out of this situation and we go into economy is growing and we are generating jobs, hopefully also opening up all these contact intensive sectors, so bringing all those, because those sit on a lot of jobs. So I think the emergency safety nets that we created can be diluted somewhat, and obviously we will. There's no rules about how to do it. It depends on how things pan out, and we will take the feedback and consequently act on it. But the basic point is, obviously, you cannot allow emergency safety nets have to be withdrawn at some point in time. And so we are taking a call at some point in time that they will be, through the course of the year, not be needed to the same extent. If your economy is genuinely growing at 8 to 8.5%, on top of a 9% GDP growth rate, presumably people are feeling happier with their lives.
There are still, of course, signs of some of the strains on the lower income side as well.
And so therefore we are not going to zero. We are lowering it. And as I said, the whole purpose of the economic survey was to say that we are into agile, feedback loop based policy making. So should we discover that there are certain things we need to do, we'll do it. And that is precisely the reason we are conservative about various forecasts. We have kept lots of buffer everywhere.
A question on the Capex and the ability to spend as well. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, or if you look at that period, you've gone from about a 3 lakh crore Capex to now 6.5, if you take out the one which is going to states. You're confident that this is money that can be spent easily?
Absolutely. If there's one thing this government has demonstrated repeatedly is our ability to deliver these kinds of things, and not just large Capex things like highways, but even things like toilets and water in the tap and all these kinds of things. Large scale Capex of various kinds, this government is able to deliver. This is one thing I think by now, hopefully, we have demonstrated.
Okay, because the Capex spending for this year, you're only about 70%, through.
No, a lot of it will get done in these 3 months. And in any case, if something goes into next year, good, we'll spend there too.
Okay. Then I'll just throw a last question to you on what you see the economy look like in the new financial year. 11.1% is the nominal GDP estimate. The economic survey suggested 8 to 8.5% real GDP growth. Correct me if I'm wrong with the number. So we are expecting growth momentum to remain strong, but inflation to come off sharply. Is that the kind of...
I think the wrong way to think about it. Remember, the same group of people forecast both numbers, and we do it for different purposes. The first is a GDP forecast, which is there. And what is it? It's a best guess of, given a certain set of assumptions, what our best guess is of real GDP growth. and 8 to 8.5 is what we have come up with. And we've given a bunch of reasons why we have done that. It assumes a significant sucking out of global liquidity. It allows for supply chains to remain disrupted for much of the year, but improving over time. It assumes $70 to $75 to the barrel, and so on. A whole bunch of why we think it'll grow at that rate. Now, the other forecast is a nominal number, which we do for purposes of budgeting. Now, there you obviously have to be a little more conservative because you're budgeting. So we have allowed, and also remember, for revenue purposes, we have to take into account that excise is not going to be available. But as far as GDP growth concerns, we've taken a conservative number. Last year also we did this, by the way.
The numbers have to talk to each other, Sanjeev. I mean,
No. It's for what the purpose is.
They have to have some correlation, right? You can't.
They have to have a correlation. One has to be more.
Projecting inflation to fall and not be able.
No. That is not how it works at all. One is a nominal GDP growth rate. We have not given you any breakup in there at all.
Yeah, but you're projecting 8 to 8.5% real GDP.
But they are different numbers for different purposes. One is a budgeting exercise, which is a conservative exercise. So we did this last year too. Nothing very surprising about it, by the way. Last year we did have a higher GDP growth rate, which even last year, incidentally, the economic surveys GDP growth forecast was the IMF growth forecast was higher than the economic surveys forecast, and the economic surveys GDP growth forecast was higher than what was suggested by the nominal number in the budget. So we do this every year. I don't know why every year I have to explain.
Every year there isn't a disconnect between what the numbers are saying.
No, so and of course you have to keep a buffer if you're doing budgeting exercise. I don't even understand why this is a problem.
It's a problem.
That's how you keep. This is called creeping cushion.
There's a disconnect between what is.
No, why don't you read the economic survey? It talks a lot about barbell strategies, safety nets, cushions. That's why we accumulate a lot of reserves as well. Same reason. Foreign exchange reserves are increased because you want to keep buffers. They have to have buffers in the system. If you want a strategy which is based on risk-taking economy, you want to open things up, you have to have buffers in the system.
That was not my question, actually. My question was that the two numbers are telling us two different things about the
economy. They're not.
They are.
They are not. They are exact. They are done by exactly the same guys, by the way.
Sorry?
The exact same people come up with the same two numbers. And you have to understand that one of the numbers is for one purpose, the other is for another purpose, and you have to allow a certain amount of buffer. So you have to allow that. Of course, we would be very thrilled if GDP exceeds our forecast. We'd be very thrilled if the amount of revenues exceeds our forecasts, which happened, by the way, in this financial year.
You're not taking my point on that. So I'll leave it at that, Sanjeev. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Okay. Right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching.